Have you ever wondered why your mind keeps moving even on quiet days? Have you ever asked why emotions rise before you can stop them? Have you ever felt tired of reacting the same way again and again? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Son.Mindfulness. I am truly grateful to have you here today. Thank you for giving a few minutes of your precious time to this moment. Many people over 50 have told me they've lived a long life, yet never truly understood their own mind. They wonder why they worry so much. They ask why they react so quickly. They feel confused about why old emotions return again and again. Have you ever felt that way too? In our busy modern world, we spend hours checking the news and scrolling through our phones, but we rarely check in with our own mind. And that is why we feel pulled around by thoughts, why we lose balance, why stress grows quietly inside us. Have you ever wished you understood what was happening within you? The good news is this: there is a simple path forward, a gentle way to understand the movements of your mind, a way to stop fearing your emotions and stop being controlled by them. That path is observation. The quiet act of watching your mind with honesty and care. When you learn to observe your mind, you begin to see something most people never notice in their whole life. Why does this matter to you? Because your mind shapes almost everything you experience. It colors how you love, how you get hurt, how you worry, how you heal. Understanding your mind is the key to living with more peace each day. This is the heart of Son.Mindfulness, a place where we explore Buddhist wisdom, meditation, and gentle stories to support your inner life. If you want to nourish peace and clarity in your daily living, I invite you to subscribe and walk this path with us. Your presence here today is truly appreciated. I wish you health, peace, happiness, and unexpected kindness in your life. Now I invite you to stay with me a little longer. Please watch until the end of the video, because what happens when you truly observe your mind may surprise you. Are you ready to open the door to your inner world? Let us begin. Part 1. The mind we forget to look at. My dear friends, I want to invite you into a simple reflection. It may sound gentle, but it carries the weight of a lifetime. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly checked in with your own mind? Not checking your phone, not checking the news, but checking you. You see, many people over 50 tell me the same thing when they visit the temple here in the United States. They say, "Teacher, my life has slowed down, but my mind hasn't." And I always smile softly and reply, "Yes, the body ages, but the mind keeps running as if it's being chased." Have you ever felt that way? You sit in your living room, the house is quiet, but inside your thoughts are still busy, moving from worry to memory, from regret to planning. Isn't it curious? We trust this mind to guide every decision, every emotion, every step we take. Yet so rarely do we stop to see how it actually works. We look at everything else, the stock market, the weather, our children's faces, even the wrinkles in the mirror. But we forget to look at the one thing shaping our entire experience. And that, my friends, is the greatest paradox of human life. I remember an elderly gentleman at the temple once telling me, "Teacher, I've lived for 70 years, but I don't think I've ever really observed my own mind." His voice trembled as if he had discovered something startling. And I told him gently, "Most people don't. It's not because we lack wisdom. It's because no one ever taught us to look inward." Think about it. We spend decades learning how to fix a house, build a career, raise children, save for retirement. But whoever showed us how to understand the very instrument shaping how we feel every single day? We scroll through updates about other people's lives, and yet the life within us remains unexplored. I want you to imagine something right now. Imagine living your entire life in the same home, but never once opening the door to the room at the end of the hallway. Not because you're afraid, but because you didn't know the door was important. Your mind is that room, always there, always shaping your life, but often left unopened. So today we begin by acknowledging this simple truth. We have overlooked our own mind. We have trusted it without understanding it. And the Buddha, 2,600 years ago, discovered something profound not by traveling the world, not by studying mountains of books, but by turning inward and simply watching. And perhaps this is where our own journey begins too. With a quiet turning inward, with the courage to look at what has always been here. With a gentle curiosity to ask, what is my mind doing right now? Because that single question, asked with honesty, can open a door many of us have kept closed for a lifetime. Part 2. What it truly means to observe the mind. Direct seeing, not analysis. My dear friends, as we continue this journey together, I want to gently clarify something that many people misunderstand. When I tell you to observe your mind, I am not asking you to analyze yourself, to judge yourself, or to figure yourself out like a puzzle. No, that is not the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Observing the mind is something far simpler and far more intimate. It is direct seeing, a quiet, honest noticing of what is happening within you in this very moment. Not yesterday's story, not tomorrow's plan, and not the long explanations of why you are the way you are. Just this moment. Just what is here. One evening, a woman in her 60s came to the temple after meditation and said, "Teacher, I think too much. When I try to observe my mind, I end up analyzing everything. Why I'm sad, why I'm angry, why people treat me the way they do." I smiled and told her, "My dear, that is thinking about the mind, not observing it." She looked puzzled, so I asked her, "Right now, in this very moment, what is your mind doing?" She paused, and for the first time that night, she became still enough to see that her mind was busy creating explanations she didn't need. You see, real observation is more like watching the sky. When a cloud passes, you don't debate where it came from or predict where it will go. You simply notice, a cloud is passing. And then it moves on. In the same way, when a thought arises, maybe worry, maybe irritation, maybe a memory, you simply see, a thought is here. No story, no commentary, just recognition. I want you to try something. Right now, gently ask yourself, what is the mind doing at this moment? Maybe it's remembering something from earlier today. Maybe it's anticipating tomorrow. Maybe it's saying, I don't know how to observe my mind. Whatever it is, just notice it. That noticing is awareness, and awareness is the beginning of freedom. Scientific studies on mindfulness say the same thing. When we observe our thoughts without getting entangled in them, the brain's fear and stress centers begin to quiet down. We stop feeding the cycles that keep us anxious or reactive. This is not mysticism. This is the mind responding to gentle attention. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he didn't become awakened by analyzing his childhood, or debating philosophy, or predicting the future. He simply watched, moment by moment, the movements of the mind. He saw thoughts rise and fall. He saw feelings appear and fade. He saw the mind react, resist, cling, fear, hope, imagine. And through this honest seeing, wisdom arose naturally. So when I ask you to observe your mind, I am inviting you into this same simplicity. Not to dissect yourself, not to fix yourself, but to be present with what is here, directly, tenderly. Like sitting beside an old friend you finally learned to listen to. Because when you stop analyzing and start truly seeing, something quiet and beautiful begins to open inside you. And it is from that quietness that understanding grows. Not from thinking, but from awareness itself. Part 3. What begins to change when you observe your mind? My dear friends, let us continue this gentle journey inward. You may be wondering, if I simply observe my mind, what will actually change? It's a fair question. We human beings like to know where the path leads, especially as we grow older and learn to value our time and energy. But the beauty of this practice is that the change doesn't come from forcing anything. It comes quietly, naturally, the way dawn arrives. Not with a shout, but with light slowly touching the world. When you begin observing your mind, even for a few moments each day, something subtle but profound starts to unfold. I remember an older gentleman at the temple, a retired school principal. He once told me, "Teacher, I've spent my whole life telling students to be calm and patient, yet I've never understood how to calm my own mind." So I asked him to try simply observing his thoughts. Not controlling, not fixing, just watching. A few weeks later, he said with a soft smile, "I still get irritated, but now I see the irritation coming. Like footsteps I can hear before the knock on the door." That, my friends, is the beginning of transformation. You see, the moment you observe the mind, even briefly, you create a small space, just a breath wide, between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, choice appears. Before observation, life feels like a chain reaction. Someone says something sharp, and your anger rises instantly. A memory of the past returns and sadness floods in. A worry about the future pops up and fear takes over. But with observation, you start to notice the early signs. You feel the tension forming. You hear the story beginning. You catch the spark before it becomes a flame. And even if you can't stop it, you see it. And seeing changes everything. It's like when you finally take your car to the mechanic, and he shows you that strange noise you've ignored for months. Once you've heard it clearly, you can't pretend it's not there. Your awareness is awakened. In the same way, once you observe what your mind is doing, even a little, the unconscious patterns can no longer fully control you. Little by little, emotions lose their power to overwhelm you. Not because you suppress them, but because you recognize them. You begin to understand why you repeat the same mistakes, why you fall into the same arguments, why the same fears return again and again. Patterns that once seemed mysterious now reveal themselves with gentle clarity. And perhaps the most beautiful change is this. You begin to taste a quiet kind of freedom. Not the freedom of having no problems, not the freedom of getting everything you want, but the freedom of not being pulled around by every emotion, every thought, every wave of the mind. It is a freedom that arrives softly, like a warm hand on your shoulder. And you realize that peace was never something to achieve. It was something to uncover, by simply observing what has always been here. This is the promise of the practice, my friends. Not a dramatic transformation overnight, but small openings, small awakenings. The first gentle steps toward a life lived with clarity rather than confusion, with calm rather than compulsion. And it all begins with the courage to look within. Part 4. The small sacred space between what happens and how you respond. My dear friends, today I want to speak to you about a moment so small that most of us miss it all our lives. A moment hidden between one event and the next. A moment the Buddha understood deeply, and one that can change the entire course of your day, your relationships, even your inner peace. It is the space, sometimes only a heartbeat wide, between stimulus and reaction, between what happens and what you do next. Many years ago, a woman in her 70s told me, "Teacher, when my husband and I argue, I react so fast. I don't even know I'm angry until the words have already left my mouth." I took her hands and said, "My dear, that's how most people live. Life pushes a button, and we respond automatically. Without awareness, without choice. Have you ever experienced this? Someone says something sharp, a memory stings you, a worry hits your heart, and before you even realize it, your voice rises, your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral. It happens so quickly that it feels like you're not choosing your reaction, it's choosing you. But when you start observing your mind, something remarkable begins to happen. At first, you won't see any difference. You'll still react just as fast, just as intensely. But then, maybe one morning, maybe in a moment you least expect, you notice something subtle, like catching a glimpse of a bird before it disappears behind the trees. You notice, oh, anger is rising. Not I am angry, just there it is. And in that instant, a tiny gap opens. It may be only 2 or 3 seconds, but those few seconds are a blessing. Because in those seconds, you have something you never had before. Choice. A friend of mine, a psychologist, once told me that the nervous system reacts faster than conscious thought. That's why emotions feel instantaneous. But mindfulness slows down the inner world just enough for consciousness to step in. You begin to witness the spark before it becomes a flame. Imagine this. You're standing on a hill overlooking the ocean, and far below you see a wave forming. You have time. You can breathe. You can watch. You don't have to jump into the water. You don't have to be pulled under. That is what observing your mind does. It places you on that hill, with perspective, with space. Let me share a story. A longtime practitioner once told me, "Teacher, I used to think enlightenment was about never getting angry. But now I see it differently. It's about seeing the anger before I become it." And he smiled, because that small shift had changed his marriage, his work life, even the way he treated himself. When the gap appears, it's not about suppressing the emotion. It's not about pretending to be calm. It's simply about seeing clearly and choosing wisely. Someone speaks harshly. You feel the heat rising, you notice it, you breathe. And in that pause, you choose not to wound them in return. Or maybe you still speak, but with softness instead of sharpness, with clarity instead of impulse, with compassion instead of defensiveness. The Buddha said that this space, this moment of pause, is where freedom lives. Not in avoiding life, not in controlling everything around you, but in choosing how you meet the moment. The truth is, you may still react 99% of the time. But if even 1% of the time you find that gap, just once, just for a breath, your whole life begins to move in a different direction. Because that gap, my dear friends, is where wisdom takes its first breath. Part 5, the 3 essential qualities. Anattā, Sampajano, Sattama. My dear friends, as we walk deeper into this practice of understanding the mind, the Buddha offered 3 gentle yet powerful qualities to guide us. They are ancient Pali words, but their meaning is timeless, just as helpful today in an American living room as they were under the Bodhi tree 2,600 years ago. The words are Anattā, Sampajano, Sattama. Let us explore them together slowly, like savoring the first warm sip of tea on a quiet morning. Anattā, ardent, sincere effort. This doesn't mean pushing yourself, nor forcing your mind to behave a certain way. It means showing up with genuine sincerity, with a warm willingness to be present for your own life. I often tell older practitioners, you don't need youthful energy to practice. You need heartfelt sincerity. A gentleman in his late 60s once told me, "Teacher, at my age, I don't have much stamina left." I smiled and replied, "My friend, sincerity has nothing to do with stamina. It is simply caring enough to look." Anattā is this caring. It is the gentle fire that keeps your awareness alive. It is a quiet but steady commitment to awakening, to showing up for yourself, even on days when you feel a little tired or distracted. Sampajano, clear comprehension. This is the wisdom of knowing what is happening while it is happening, not thinking about it, not explaining it, but recognizing it with clarity. Imagine you are sitting at the kitchen table, and suddenly a wave of irritation rises. With Sampajano, you see, oh, irritation is here. This is what irritation feels like. You recognize the tension, the tightness, the heat. You're not lost in it, you're aware of it. A woman once told me, "Teacher, before practicing clarity, I was like someone lost in a dark room bumping into furniture. Now I feel like someone who finally turned the light on." That is Sampajano, the light of understanding. Not judgment, not analysis, just clarity. Satima, continuous mindfulness. If ardent sincerity is the fire and clear comprehension is the light, then mindfulness is the steady hand that carries both. It is remembering, moment after moment, to come back to yourself, to come back to what is here, to come back to the breath, the feeling, the movement of the mind. Many older students tell me, "Teacher, I try to be mindful, but I keep forgetting." And I always reassure them, "My dear, remembering is mindfulness, but forgetting is also part of the practice. Each time you return, the mind becomes a little more awake." Satima is the gentle returning, again and again, 100 times a day, if needed. These three qualities, atapi, sampajano, satima, form the heart of observing the mind. You don't need special abilities. You don't need perfect concentration. You simply need a sincere heart, a clear seeing, and a gentle continuity of attention. With these three companions walking beside you, even the most ordinary moments begin to shine with understanding. You start to notice not only the mind's movements, but the space around them. And in that space, wisdom grows, quietly, steadily, just as the Buddha intended. Part 6. Seeing the mind's reaction chain, Dependent Origination. My dear friends, today I want to guide you into one of the most profound discoveries of the Buddha. Something so simple, yet so transformative, that once you truly see it, you can never unsee it again. It is the understanding of how the mind reacts, step by step, link by link, in a chain so quick that most of us only notice the final explosion, not the silent sparks that led there. The Buddha called this Pratītyasamutpāda, or dependent origination, the truth that everything arises due to conditions. Nothing appears out of nowhere, not your anger, not your fear, not even your sadness. Everything has causes, and everything unfolds in a sequence. Let me tell you a story. A retired nurse who comes to the temple once said to me, "Teacher, I don't understand how my anger appears so fast. It feels like someone flips a switch." I smiled gently and said, "My dear, the switch is only the last part. Many things happen before it." And we sat together, slowly walking through her experience. For the first time in her 70 years, she saw the chain, clearly, compassionately, without judgment. It begins with something simple. Contact. A sound, a word, a facial expression, a memory that rises like a whisper from the past. Your senses meet something. This is the first link, but it happens so fast that you rarely notice it. Then comes feeling, vedana. This is crucial. The feeling is not yet anger, not yet fear, not yet resentment. It is simply pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. A subtle ripple in the heart. Imagine someone says something sharp to you. Before the anger arrives, there's a tiny flash, an unpleasant feeling in the chest or the stomach, a tightening, a discomfort. Most people never see this because the mind jumps to the next link almost instantly. Next comes craving or resistance, tan. This is the moment the mind says, "I don't like this. I want this unpleasant feeling to go away. I must defend myself." This desire to push away discomfort is automatic, like pulling your hand from a hot stove. And then, almost immediately, comes interpretation. The mind creates a story. They're disrespecting me. They don't appreciate me. They think I'm weak. My dear friends, these are thoughts, not facts. But once a story appears, emotion rises to match it. Now comes anger or fear or hurt. And finally, reaction. Words spoken, doors slammed, silence withdrawn, regret born. Most people only see the last two steps. They think anger appears suddenly like a lightning strike. But truly, it is more like a series of small dominoes falling, one after another, too fast for the untrained eye to notice. This is why observation is so powerful. When you begin to see the chain, not just the explosion at the end, you suddenly have multiple places to intervene. You can work at the level of feeling, at the level of craving, at the level of interpretation, long before anger ever appears. A man once told me, "Teacher, it feels like I spent my whole life trying to control the fire, but I never realized I could simply watch the spark." And that, my dear friends, is exactly the heart of this teaching. When you see the chain clearly and calmly, you are no longer a prisoner of automatic reactions. You begin to sense the unfolding of the mind with the same patience as watching a tide roll in. There is space, there is choice, there is wisdom. And when wisdom enters, the chain no longer binds you, it frees you. Part 7. The second arrow. The difference between what happens and the story the mind creates. My dear friends, today I want to share with you one of the Buddha's most compassionate teachings, something that has comforted countless hearts across centuries, and perhaps may bring comfort to yours as well. It is the teaching of the two arrows. The Buddha said that in life, we are sometimes struck by a first arrow. This arrow is unavoidable. It is the pain of being human, harsh words spoken to us, a disappointment, an illness, the loss of someone we love, or even a simple moment of friction in a conversation. This first arrow hurts, yes, but it is natural, it is part of life. But then, my dear friends, something else happens, something subtle, silent, and far more damaging. The second arrow. This is the story the mind creates about the event. And this arrow, unlike the first, is optional. Let me tell you about Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her 70s who comes to the meditation group every Thursday. One afternoon, she came in with tears in her eyes. She said, "Teacher, my daughter raised her voice at me yesterday, and I can't stop hurting." I asked gently, "What did she say?" "It wasn't even the words," she replied. "It was what I told myself afterward, that she doesn't love me, that I'm a burden, that maybe I was a bad mother." I touched her hand and said, "My dear, those are the second arrows." The first arrow was the raised voice. The second arrow was the painful story her mind created afterward. We all do this. Perhaps someone ignores your message and instantly the mind whispers, "They don't care. They're upset with me. I must have done something wrong." Maybe your body aches one morning and your mind jumps to, "I'm getting old. It's all downhill from here. I won't be able to take care of myself." The event itself, the first arrow, was small. But the story that followed, the second arrow, cut far deeper. The Buddha taught that the wise person feels the first arrow but does not add the second. Why? Because they have learned to see the difference between what actually happened and what their mind is making it mean. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're sitting at home and you hear thunder in the distance. The sound is real. That is the first arrow. But then imagine your mind suddenly adds, "A storm is coming. The roof might leak, the power might go out. What if something terrible happens?" My friends, none of that is happening. Those are stories, second arrows, unnecessary suffering layered on top of real life. When you observe your mind, even just a little, you start to separate the two. You begin to say, "This is what happened, and this is what my mind added." And that simple clarity can save you from hours, days, or even years of unnecessary pain. I remember a man once telling me, "Teacher, I realize now that I've lived most of my life fearing things that never happened." He paused and then whispered, "It wasn't life hurting me, it was my mind." My dear friends, when you begin to see the second arrow as it is, something beautiful happens. You become gentler with yourself, softer, kinder. You stop shooting yourself with stories that don't serve you. You feel the first arrow. Yes, pain is part of being alive. But suffering, that second arrow, with awareness, compassion, and a clear mind, you can choose to put it down. Part 8. Transforming Inner Language. From "I am angry" to "There is anger." My dear friends, today I want to speak about a shift so small that it may seem insignificant at first glance, yet so powerful that it can reshape the entire landscape of your inner life. It is the shift from saying, "I am angry," to "there is anger." This may look like a simple change in grammar, but in truth, it is a profound change in your relationship with yourself. It is the difference between being trapped inside an emotion and being free to observe it with clarity and compassion. I once sat with a gentleman in his early 80s. He had lived through war, poverty, and the long responsibilities of raising 3 children after his wife passed away. He was strong, but he carried a lifelong habit of saying, "I'm an angry man, teacher. That's just who I am." His eyes softened when he said it, as though he were confessing something fixed in stone. So I asked softly, "My friend, right now, in this moment, is anger here?" He paused. "No," he whispered, "not right now." "Well," I said gently, "if anger were who you are, shouldn't it always be here?" He looked at me with surprise, as though a window had opened in a room he'd lived in for decades without knowing it had light. You see, when you say, "I am angry," you merge yourself with the emotion. You become the anger. There is no space to breathe, no room to observe, no possibility of choice. You are trapped inside the storm. But when you say there is anger, something softens. You and the emotion are no longer the same. The storm is still there, but now you're standing on the shore, watching the waves instead of drowning in them. I want you to imagine yourself standing beside a road. Cars are passing, some fast, some slow, some noisy, some gentle. Thoughts and emotions are like those cars. If you say, "I am the car," you will be swept away every time. But if you say there's a car passing, you remain the observer, and the observer is always free. A woman once told me, "Teacher, when I say there is sadness, something inside me relaxes." "Exactly," I replied, "because sadness is no longer your identity. It becomes an experience, not a definition." This shift is deeply supported by neuroscience as well. Research shows that labeling emotions from a place of observation, what scientists call affect labeling, reduces activity in the brain's emotional centers and increases activity in the parts responsible for clarity and regulation. In simple terms, when you see the emotion clearly, it loses its power to overwhelm you. Let me tell you a story from my own life. Years ago, during a difficult time in my community, I felt a wave of frustration rising. The old habit would have said, "I'm frustrated, I'm failing, I'm not enough." But instead I paused and simply noted, there is frustration. Just that. Nothing dramatic. And in that moment, I felt space return. Like opening a window in a stuffy room. The feeling didn't disappear immediately, but it softened. It became something I could hold gently rather than wrestle with. This is what happens when we change our inner language. It is not a trick. It is not denial. It is a return to the truth. Emotions come and go. They arise and fade. They appear and dissolve. They are not who you are. And in that knowing, my dear friends, you begin to live differently. You speak more gently. You act more wisely. You treat yourself with more tenderness because you finally understand you are not the anger, you are not the sadness, you are not the fear. You are the awareness that sees them. The sky in which all weather appears. The steady presence behind every passing cloud. And when you remember this, even for a single breath, freedom begins to bloom in the most unexpected places. Part 9. The impermanence of emotions. Seeing them, not fearing them, not fighting them. My dear friends, today I want to speak about something each of us has lived through countless times, yet rarely understand deeply. The impermanence of our emotions. This teaching is simple, but if you truly see it, not just with your mind, but with your heart, it can lift a lifetime of fear from your shoulders. Let me begin with a question. Have you ever noticed how quickly emotions change? One moment the heart is heavy, The next moment, after a kind word or a breath of fresh air, it softens. One morning you wake up feeling anxious, but by afternoon, after a warm conversation or a quiet walk, that anxiety has faded like mist under the sun. Emotions are not permanent residents. They are visitors. They knock, they enter, they stay for a while, and then they leave. I remember a woman in her late 70s who once told me, "Teacher, I'm afraid of my emotions. When sadness comes, I feel like it will never end." I held her hand gently and said, "My dear, sadness has visited you many times in your life, but it has never stayed forever, has it?" She paused, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "No, it always passes." "Yes," I said, "because that is its nature." When we do not observe the mind, emotions seem solid, like walls surrounding us. But when we bring awareness to them, their true nature reveals itself. We begin to see that emotions are made of countless small moments, a tightness here, a thought there, a memory rising, a breath shifting. While we watch, the emotion changes before our eyes. Stronger, softer, shifting, dissolving, reshaping. Just like waves on the ocean, each wave rises with force then returns to the sea. It cannot stay. It does not intend to stay. One older gentleman at the temple once joked with me, "Teacher, my emotions come and go faster than my hair grew back after chemotherapy." We both laughed, but his insight was deep. He had learned not to fear emotions because he had watched them come and go. Fear of emotions is often worse than the emotions themselves. When anger arises, we panic. "Oh no, I shouldn't be angry." When anxiety appears, we resist. "I need this to stop right now." When sadness comes, we collapse into it. "This will never end." But the Buddha taught that the suffering is not in the emotion. It is in the resistance to the emotion. Fighting anger makes it stronger. Running from fear gives it power. Denying sadness makes it heavy. But simply seeing the emotion, this is anger, this is fear, this is sadness, creates a small, gentle space in the heart. And in that space, the emotion begins to soften on its own. Science tells us something similar. Neuroscientists say that emotions naturally peak and fade in about 90 seconds, unless we feed them with thoughts and resistance. 90 seconds. Isn't that remarkable? Imagine how many lifetime storms lasted longer only because the mind kept replaying them. When you observe emotions without running, without fighting, without judging, you learn something liberating. They don't need your control. They only need your presence. One afternoon, a man who had practiced mindfulness for years told me, "Teacher, the day I stopped fighting my emotions was the day I began to heal." I nodded and said, "Yes, because the storm calms when the wind stops blowing against it." My dear friends, when you truly see that emotions are impermanent, not because someone told you, not because a book said so, but because you witnessed it yourself, a great peace enters your life. You stop being afraid of your own heart. You stop battling with inner weather. You stop believing that every feeling defines you. Instead, you watch, you breathe, you allow, and you trust that, just like every wave, every cloud, every season, this too will pass. Part 10. Freedom in each moment. Living without resistance. Living fully present. My dear friends, we have walked a long journey together. Through the mind's habits, its reactions, its emotions, its storms, and now we arrive at the heart of it all. Freedom. Not the dramatic freedom promised in books or movies, not the freedom of escaping life, but a gentle, steady freedom available to you in each ordinary moment. A freedom born not from changing the world around you, but from changing your relationship with what arises within you. Let me begin with a simple truth. Most of our suffering doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from our resistance to what happens. When something unexpected occurs, the mind immediately says, "This shouldn't be happening. This is wrong. This is not how life was supposed to go." That resistance, tiny as it seems, builds an inner wall, and behind that wall suffering grows. But when you observe your mind, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to see the resistance as it forms, the tightening in the chest, the clenching in the jaw, the story rising in the mind. And in that moment of seeing, you have a choice: to push against reality or to soften into it. I'm reminded of an elderly man named Frank who once told me, "Teacher, after my wife passed, I fought every moment of my grief. I kept telling myself I should be stronger, should be calmer, should be over it." His voice trembled, but the day I allowed myself to feel the grief without resisting, that was the first day I could breathe again. I touched his shoulder gently and said, "Yes, my friend. Freedom begins where resistance ends. Freedom isn't the absence of pain. Freedom is the absence of struggle against pain. Imagine standing in a river. If you push against the current, you exhaust yourself. But if you soften your stance, feel the water, move with it instead of against it, the river becomes something you can navigate with grace. Life is much the same. When we stop fighting the moment, when we allow things to be as they are, not passive, not resigned, but open, steady, awake, a great calm settles into the heart. This calm is not fragile. It is not dependent on everything going right. It is the natural peace that exists when you no longer wage war with reality. And from this peace, a deeper presence blooms. You begin to live here, not in memories of the past or fears of the future. You begin to notice small things again. The warmth of the teacup in your hands, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the way sunlight lands on your living room floor, the rise and fall of your breath like the tide. A woman once told me, "Teacher, after practicing presence for a few months, my home felt different. Nothing changed, except that I was finally living in it." That is the gift of presence. It returns you to your own life. And please understand, my dear friends, presence is not something dramatic. It is simple, accessible, always available. It's the gentle touch of awareness on whatever is happening now, whether pleasant or painful. When anger arises, presence says, "Ah, here it is." When joy arises, presence says, "Let me savor this." When disappointment arrives, presence says, "This too belongs to the human heart." And in this gentle welcoming, freedom quietly appears. Not as a grand revelation, but as a soft opening in the heart. A sense that life is no longer something to survive, but something to participate in fully. The Buddha's final words were, "All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence." This was not a warning, it was an invitation to live this moment, this breath, this day, with clarity, tenderness, and sincere presence. Because true freedom is not found in the future. It is found here, in this very moment, when you stop resisting life and begin to live it with an open heart. And as you practice this, moment after moment, you may suddenly realize you have been free all along. Conclusion: living with awareness, walking with freedom. My dear friends, thank you for staying with me until this moment. You have walked through 10 deep reflections with an open heart. You have listened with patience and curiosity. That already shows your sincerity. And I want to honor that. Throughout this journey, we explored the quiet world within you. We saw how the mind moves. We saw how thoughts arise. We saw how emotions shift and fade. Did you notice how alive your inner life truly is? We spoke about the small space between stimulus and response. That tiny gap where your freedom grows. Have you ever felt that space appear? Would you like to feel it more often? We looked at the chain of reactions that leads to anger and sorrow. We saw how each link forms. We saw how the mind creates stories. Do you recognize any of those stories in your own life? Would you like to loosen their grip? We talked about the second arrow, the pain we add to ourselves without knowing. Have you begun to notice your second arrows? Which one will you choose to put down first? We learned to shift from "I am angry" to "there is anger." A small change in words, but a great change in the heart. Have you tried this shift yet? What did you feel when you did? We explored the impermanence of emotions. We saw how they come and go like passing clouds. There is nothing to fear in a cloud. There is nothing to fight in a cloud. Would your life feel lighter if you trusted this truth more deeply? And finally, we touched the meaning of true freedom, not escape, not control, but gentle presence. Freedom in each breath, freedom in each moment, freedom in meeting life without resistance. Do you feel a little more spacious now? My dear friends, I want to say this from my heart. I am deeply grateful that you shared this time with me. You could have been anywhere else, yet you chose to be here, listening, reflecting, opening new doors within yourself. That is a beautiful act of courage. If even one insight touched your heart today, celebrate that. It means your practice has already begun. Would you like to take the next step? Would you like to see what unfolds when you observe your mind a little each day? Start small, one breath, one moment, one quiet noticing. Let the practice grow naturally. And watch how your life slowly changes in gentle and surprising ways. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What touched you the most? What will you carry into tomorrow? Your reflections may help someone else see their own heart more clearly. If you found value here, I warmly invite you to subscribe to Son.Mindfulness. More teachings are coming, more stories, more gentle guidance for your inner journey. Your support helps this community grow. And I am grateful for every one of you. May you be healthy, may you be peaceful, may you be happy. May life bring unexpected kindness to your path. Thank you for listening, thank you for practicing, thank you for being here. With gratitude and warmth, always.